everybody. Thank you for watching. As always, I really appreciate it. Recently, as some of you will know, I dropped an episode on how to cut a triple miter. And after dropping that episode, a couple of you commented on how you viewed perhaps the origins of that joint having a connection to joinery practice historically in the Far East, which I hadn't thought about. As I mentioned, I found that joint in a book many years ago. I used it in a project that I got, a job that I got, and that's how I came to know about it. But nonetheless, when I started reading those comments, that got me thinking, because I've had an interest in Far East joinery for a while, but never really looked much into it. So with some of your comments, I started Googling, and sure enough, in fact, one of you, I think, referenced perhaps that joint having origins from China. And sure enough, I found a very similar joint, various variations of that joint under the heading of Chinese joinery. In fact, one of you commented that, or suggested that perhaps that same joint could be made using loose tenons. And in my internet research, I found a variation of that joint using loose tenons and other ones. So it's very interesting. So I appreciate the commentary, because that made me decide, you know what, I've had interest in Far East joinery for a while, so why don't I dig a little deeper? So I found another book on joinery, this one. This is on Japanese joinery from Dorian Bracht. Not sure if I'm pronouncing the last name correct or not, but found this book on Amazon, bought it, and as you can see, I started flagging pages I want to, dig more into. I haven't read the whole book, but as I go through it, it seems like it's kind of divided into, among other things, two primary topics. One in which the joinery is linear. You're basically joining boards in a linear fashion to extend them. And then the other section that I've kind of focused more on, we already see all my flags, is joinery where boards are joined at an angle. A lot of them at a right angle. Because I'm looking at that thinking, okay, how can I incorporate perhaps this joinery in future projects? And I just felt the ones at an angle would be more applicable for furniture. So out of this book, I found the first one I wanted to try, and that is a through mortise and tenon joint with mitered faces. So that is what this episode is going to be about, how to make this joint right here. Let's see here. And basically, I'm going to go through how to make this joint. I'm using hand tools, but also the machinery here in my shop. So with that, let's get into it. Okay, so here are a couple of pieces of poplar that I'm going to use to make this joint. They're about 1 1/8 inch thick and about 2.5 inches wide. So first thing I'm going to do is start laying out the joints on the ends here. So first thing I'm going to do is mark off on both pieces the limits of the miter. Go ahead and draw the miter. Okay, and for this piece, the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to have to make a mortise about half the width of this part that I've marked off. So it's about just about 1 inch. And the mortise I'm going to cut will be 3/8 inch wide. So I think I already have this set up, but let me just make sure. I'm going to cut a mortise right here. I'm going to do that using my router. So let me set that up. Okay, so I have my workpiece set up here in the jig. And this is actually the same jig that I used in the episode I did on loose tenon joinery, like to make a chair, I think it was. So the way this jig works is basically you just wedge the workpiece in between the main sides with various pieces of scrap, as I've done here. And I have a couple of pieces of 100 grit sandpaper that I use spray adhesive to attach to the sides of the jigs to hold things in place. But this is the main workpiece. And I'm going to use, again, as I said, my router to cut the mortise. So I have that set up here in a 3/8 inch bit already in the router. So now let me just center the cut and set up the stops. I'm actually going to flip this workpiece around a couple of times to make sure it's centered. You know, by rotating it 180, both in the, I guess you call the X direction and the Y, but I'm going to start right here. And these clamps here serve two purposes. One, they provide a little more pressure to hold the workpiece in place. And also it serves as stops. I'm going to cut this as a through mortise. And I'm going to do 1/2 and 1/2. So I'm going to go about 1 inch and 1/4 or so, a little over, on each side. All right, let me do the cut. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to square this mortise to accept the tenon I'm going to cut in this other piece. Okay, so next thing I need to do is I need to cut these miters off here on the ends and remove material on each of these faces down to about half this distance on each side, in between the inside edge of the mortise to the outside edge of the workpiece. And that's about a little over 1/8 of an inch. So I need to basically, after I cut the miter, remove the faces down to about here. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to cut these miters over at the table saw. Then I'm going to make several more just rough passes here to remove material. I will then bring this piece back to the bench and clean it up with a chisel. Set the depth of cut. Okay, so now the next thing you need to do is cut the other half of the joint. And the main thing I need to focus on now is cutting the tenon that's going to fit inside this mortise. And I guess the best way I can describe that I need to cut this tenon, which I guess is always the case, but it seems more so here, is basically I'm going to create the tenon by removing all the wood around the tenon on this joint. And you'll see what I'm talking about when I start cutting. But the first thing I'm going to do is lay out the tenon. So let me carry this line all the way around. Same 1-inch tenon. And the tenon will be right there. And so the first thing I'm going to do to cut this tenon is I'm going to remove the wood on the back of this tenon. So I'm going to get my router joint or router jig back out and cut a 3/8 inch mortise basically from here to the end down to the tenon to remove that wood. Okay, so now the next thing I need to do with this piece is I need to cut the corresponding shoulders around this tenon, which is right here. And you recall that this width is the same as this. I basically cut that in half. So I still have the marking gauge set up. So let me just mark here and here. So what I need to remove now is this material all the way across this piece. And to do that, I'm going to use my tenoning jig on the table saw. And finally, before I start to fit the joint, I need to cut this miter to make the other half of the mitered face to remove this material here. So I put my miter sled back in the table saw, and let me do that. So now let me start cleaning up this joint and see how it fits. As I say often, not perfect, but you get the idea. All right, thank you again for watching. I hope you found this useful. If you did, please don't forget to hit that like button. It's very much appreciated. And if you have not done so already, also please subscribe to my channel so you get notifications of future content. And if you have any questions about anything that you saw, any questions or comments about anything you saw in this episode, please put those in the comment section below. I'll do my best to get back to you as quickly as possible. And that's it for this time. Take care.